All right, welcome to Little Pod That Could. My guest today is Casey Kula. I didn't even check to see if I did that right because I went off your Instagram and said I saw that it rhymes with hula, so I was like, okay, I'm gonna try it. So I think I got it. Casey, thanks for
You,
being here.
you totally nailed it.
Okay, great.
And it's great to be here
And
with you.
yeah, and I wanted to talk. I don't know. I think we had some mutual friends. I'm not really exactly sure how you came on my radar, but you are running for governor in the state of Oregon. And I kind of want to talk about some of that today. I do want to do a disclaimer beforehand and say that, this is the first time we've ever talked. It's
Yeah.
not like this is some kind of, campaign video. You and I have never met. We've never talked before. You didn't limit anything that I could ask you about. You didn't ask me to not talk about certain things. So um, I want to be totally transparent because I do think
Yeah.
one of the things I want to talk about is that I do think people are generally just distrustful of the media and of politicians in general. And so I think like if we're really going to start to make change and have real conversations, they need to be fully transparent. And so I thought it was important for us to kind of nail that down at the beginning.
I think it's a really good point.
Okay. And so, if you could just maybe provide a little context for people who maybe don't know who you are, maybe give a little context of who you are and what you do, and kind of why you're running for governor of Oregon.
Definitely. So, thanks, Kevin. I'm currently a Yamhill County Commissioner. I was elected in 2018. So Yamhill County is south of Washington County and north of Polk County and across the Willamette River from Marion County. And my wife and I farm vegetables, tree fruits, certified organic vegetables and tree fruits, and OLCC licensed cannabis until a couple of months ago on a river island in the Willamette River, in between Yamhill and Marion County. But we're on the Yamhill County side. Um, and I ran for Yamhill County Commissioner because I really felt like it was important to have a farmer and a rural resident and a scientist on the Board of Commissioners. But not only that, I really wanted to make sure that people were had a commissioner who engaged with them, really thought deeply about the subjects and the challenges that we have in our county, and focused on making sure that people were safe and healthy. And I didn't see that on the Board of Commissioners, and so I ran with that in mind. At the running for governor, again, I want to focus on health and safety of Oregonians and health and safety of the place that we all depend upon. And as a farmer, I know that firsthand. We're seeing climate change devastating communities, challenging our ability to grow certain crops, um, and generally making life a lot more uncertain for both urban and rural residents. So I am in this race to win. I'm a certified, or I'm a certified, I'm a registered Democrat. And part of the reason why I'm a Democrat is that I really feel like there's a place for governments in doing the work that we can't do on our own as individuals or as little communities, and that sometimes we really need that bigger frame, the people who build the bridges, keep our roads running, and run our schools, as it were. But I'm here because I'm pretty sure I'm here because you and I have a cannabis connection.
Yes, yeah. I didn't know that you knew that, but
I
yeah,
just had this. I had this sense.
yeah, I grew for 6 years under the medical program.
Okay.
We ran a small warehouse in Kaiser, and I don't know how much into the weeds, no pun intended, I want to get on that, but like I wouldn't mind talking about some of that legislation too, and sort of how that changed with what the voters passed and what was actually implemented. Maybe we can kind of talk about that. I just have some overall questions. I feel like I want to ask the questions that I've always wanted to ask of someone that's in a political position. Like, how do we deal with these broader questions? I was talking to a couple friends
Mm-hmm.
in preparation for this, and it was like, I don't really care about the budget of Oregon, but I want to know, like, how are we going to bring frustrated conservatives in the state of Oregon into the
Mm-hmm.
mix? And I think, you as a farmer have a unique position there because I do believe, a lot of the rural areas in Oregon are, largely farmlands. And a lot of the conservative areas there. But before we get into that, I did kind of want to talk about agriculture a little bit as well,
Sounds great.
because looking at the stuff that you kind of your platform, it does seem like climate change is a major concern for you. And I kind of wonder how you square that with agriculture in general. You know, like I've gotten really into regenerative agriculture, no-till farming, stuff like
Hmm.
that. And I kind of wonder what your take on agriculture's role in preventing further climate change and how you see that happening.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, absolutely. I would say that though some of the major legislation in Oregon that was attempted to be passed in what 2019 and 2020 was specifically targeted at um, addressing the role of climate change in our communities, and we saw farmers and foresters among having the strongest pushback on that legislation. Um, but that doesn't mean that they're not some of the primary people impacted by it. So I mean, that's the on one hand, right? Like people who depend upon the environment for our living are hurt among the most in terms of our livelihood. So not discounting the fact that we've had ice storms that were devastating to elderly people on a fixed income in trailers in Yamhill County who lost power for 8 days, right? Like smoke for farm workers, right? Their lungs a
Mm-hmm.
year ago was devastating.
Mm-hmm.
But farmers themselves and their livelihoods are challenged every day by the weird and extreme weather that we're having directly related to carbon emissions. On the flip side of that, farmers can do a lot in our communities, both to like actually reduce carbon emissions, but to sequester carbon to like store it, and also to
In
do
the
some of that.
soil.
Yeah, and do some of that
Mm-hmm.
mitigation work too. One of the things that we're seeing all around us is drought, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
extreme drought in many areas, and with that is a loss of water in our streams. So I can actually see at some point one having farmers working with urban areas to essentially lease their water rights. So like
Mm-hmm.
anytime, for example, the state of Oregon can be like, here's money for efficiency in irrigation, and then the farmer says, okay, here's water that I transfer to the city of Hillsborough or the city of Salem, right, where they're actually taking the water that they're saving and connecting to a community of people for it. So there's a lot of different ways that farmers and foresters can be involved in actually addressing it.
Hmm. Okay. Do you think that your position as someone who has been a farmer for the last more than a decade puts you in a unique position to maybe speak to farmers that are on the other end of the political spectrum?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, the reality is that we are divided. Like I'm a liberal farmer, and there are farmers who are conservative, but we all see the challenges that we're experiencing. Like we see them for real. The heat wave. We're looking at on some fields they were harvesting grass seed right after that big heat wave in June, and so
Mm-hmm.
that was like the time of pure like profitable ripening of grass seed. And so when some farms are seeing 50% reduction in germination yield, right? So like half of their seed isn't going to germinate.
Mm-hmm.
And likewise, like so that's big scale. Like I think of grass seed farmers as among the larger scale farms, but on the micro scale, I don't know if you like stay super tight into the cannabis community, but last year, right, the smoke that we had for 2.5
Right.
weeks during ripening basically
Yes.
meant that I should have had lights on my crop, and because I didn't have
Mm-hmm.
lights on my crop, I went from having 29% THC in some of my plants to 24%, which is,
Yeah.
is like, that's like a
Right.
thousand
This is
dollar difference
yes.
in
Right.
retail price.
Right. Yeah.
So
And
definitely like we need to find the things that connect us. And even if those things are that we're both experiencing, or we're all experiencing hardship from climate change, that's a starting point, right? Like it's a bridge to build.
yeah, and so I guess that brings me to the larger question of like, and this is, I mean, a lot of what I was thinking about and have been thinking about is more philosophical. At this point, I
Mhm.
feel just politically exhausted, and it's hard to even wade into any of this stuff because it's like so overwhelming. You know, there's so much to look at, and I feel like the system is broken. You know, like for instance, you know, you can't even say that Kate Brown has done a bad job because eventually you would need the Democratic Party to back you. You know what I mean? And it's like that's how like all political candidates have to be mindful of what they say, but because of that, they can't really ever take real positions on things. And
Hmm.
the system itself is designed, it incentivizes people to look out for themselves instead of their larger constituency. And I think it just continues to get worse and degrade over time. And I wonder how you see, at least that's my perspective. Maybe you don't see it that way, but how do you see us coming back from where we're at politically?
I mean, I think they, maybe some of the details aren't totally true for everybody, but I totally know what you mean, right? Like, I get the general sentiment of it. Um, I think that it's important for our leadership. Like, I think that one thing I saw at the federal level over the past 4 years, 4.5 years, was that leadership at the highest levels of government influence how we all talk to each other and
Hmm.
how we see the world, right? And what I see in this is that government, like state leadership, so the governor's office, statewide leaders really need to be the ones modeling the working with people that they don't agree with and that maybe they don't even understand, and maybe people that are anathema to them that like they might view as morally wrong. And likewise, like sides, I actually think that we need to work together before we understand each other.
Yeah, well, and
Does
it's
that make sense?
interesting.
Like, I think that that's
Yeah,
a way to do it, is that like, damn, we've got an emergency. Like, maybe pretend like everything is an emergency, because a lot of things are.
it is. Yeah,
And for
right.
on the island, when the island floods, we're not like, did you
Yeah.
did
How
you
did you
like that
vote in the
post of
last
mine on
election? Yeah,
Facebook?
yeah, yeah. Yeah. No, I hear you. And that's, I think what it's interesting that you're referring to them as leaders, because in my mind, I am careful not to call them leaders because I feel like I can't pick more than a handful of people in politics that I know of that I would say, hey, this person is a real leader. The majority of them are kowtowing to
Hmm.
their populace, to their base. You know, they're doing whatever will get them reelected. And to me, that's not how the system was designed, but that's
Hmm.
what the system has morphed into. And I think that's part of the reason. If we look at like vaccine hesitancy, anti-mask stuff, a lot of that I think stems from people don't trust the government, they don't trust the media, and
Yeah.
rightfully so. Those entities have been dishonest for decades with them, and now seem shocked when people aren't willing to just take what they
Right.
say at face value.
I know.
And how do you reconcile that?
I was looking at so I don't have a lot of contacts in the governor's office, but what we do have
Hmm.
is like a kind of a regional representative of the governor who works with counties. And I looked back on some texts that I had to her from last year, and one of them was like, "Hey, y'all really need to be aware of the fact that there are going to be people, once you get a vaccine, there are going to be people who do not trust it. And it might be
Hmm.
across the political spectrum. And I hope that you're thinking about that and working with the very best communicators out there to deal with this." And it was like, oh yeah, look where we are.
Right, right. Yeah,
So
I mean,
I
so
do
what
think
would you,
I think
if
it
you
stems
were,
from a lot of mistrust.
yes. So if you were governor, which is what you're hoping for here,
Mm-hmm.
what steps are you taking to help improve the situation that we're facing here with people not trusting government, not trusting the media?
Yeah, yeah, totally. So the I know that this sounds trite, but it's like you got to start somewhere, right? Which is that you
Hmm.
literally go to people where they are and listen to them. And it's amazing how so many misunderstandings and broken trust can be like mended a little bit by literally just listening to people and not bringing your own agenda to it. Just being like, "Hey,
Hmm.
I'm here as a leader in your community to listen to you right now."
Yeah.
So that's one like super simple thing that I want to see our governor do, is go around the state of Oregon and not be scared of people in their own communities and not have an agenda to that trip, to that tour, to that like working with them, and before you get into a crisis mode. And then the second one is what I do all the time, which is that I intentionally build relationships with people that I either don't understand or know that I have differences with. Not like this isn't a working with the devil kind of thing. Like I'm not talking
Hmm.
about. I'm not. Let's see. I'm not talking about working like, hey, Black Lives Matter activists, you really need to get together with Proud Boys, and we just need to figure this out. I mean,
Hmm.
on a basic level, when I came into office, I was like the liberal kid, hippie, pot farmer, like to
Sure.
put stereotypes. And
Sure.
immediately off the bat, the things that I proposed were vociferously opposed by our local chamber of commerce. And I was like, I need to figure this situation out. And so I actually went to Portland and I went to the Portland Business Alliance. And I was like, all right,
Hmm.
Andrew Hone, what do I do in order to build a good relationship with the local Chamber of Commerce, like a good faith
Hmm.
relationship? And he gave me some pointers. And then I went back to my local chambers and I was like, all right, so here's the deal. I want to be your friend, but not really. I want to like work with you and have a trusting relationship. What do we do? What can we work on right now? And so that built up. And then so another like the building of it further was that when the pandemic hit, I started a live streamed bi-weekly roundtable so
Hmm.
people could watch mayors, city councilors, county commissioners, congressional delegation, legislative delegation, business leaders, and members of the Latinx leadership and advocacy groups. I brought them all together and I was like, we need to all speak to the community our truth for our particular community, and so that like it's a trust building, right, where you're building trust with your community, but you're also building trust in the relationships of leadership too, so people can
Yeah.
watch us interact and be like, huh, I don't agree with what he said, but I see that he is working with her right now.
Do you think
So
that's
it takes a lot of
possible?
time.
Yeah. And that's what I'm wondering,
Sorry.
like if, all of that sounds great, like in theory, I just wonder like if you become part of a cog in this system that seems to churn out, it changes you. Do you worry about, can we actually make this happen? Because, it's like, I just feel like the both sides get further and further apart from each other and really dig their heels in. And it's like, we're not getting anything done. Like Trump gets elected and rolls back everything Obama did. And then Biden gets elected and rolls back everything Trump did. So we take one step forward,
Mm-hmm.
take two steps back. No one can agree. Everyone says this is the worst president of all time. This is the worst time. And it seems, to me, it feels overwhelming, you know? And I
Absolutely. I
wonder,
think it's
have
totally
you,
reasonable to feel overwhelmed.
what's the sense you get from people as you're traveling around, talking about wanting to be the next governor?
Yeah. So I think one of the solutions to that, Kevin, is to um, identify solutions at like all of the scales, right? So like neighborhood level solutions, and then like city level solutions, and then county level solutions, and state level, so that there's like something that people can grab onto in their own community that's like, hey, we did that, like together we did that. And
Hmm.
it doesn't have to be the governor leading that, and it doesn't have to be the governor providing funding or the state doing the work, but it can be the governor bringing that to the table of like, hey, let's do things that actually improve our community, and it doesn't have to be because of money, and it doesn't have to be because of politics. So that's
Hmm.
where like those are the things that I really can see happening, kind of all over the place. An example of that
So,
is that the city of Yamhill, right? They're out of water. Um,
okay.
they have surface water, right, and it's just like it's drying up by the day. And so for their community, they were like, "Hey, we really need you to reduce your water use." And people in the city did it because they trusted their local leadership that they were making the right call in that moment. But they can't do it without having the county on the board and without the state on board. And so there's these like little solutions. So now we're like, okay, how do we get you more water? Like, do we tap my well on the other side of the county, or do we talk to a farmer next door who might have a little bit of extra water on their water right? So it's like these little things that I feel like are um, ways to build the trust and kind of knit communities back together again. But I want to
Hmm.
say, Kevin, that I'm under no illusions that we can like have a state and even regions that are like happy and together, because like we're all really different. I mean, like you and
Hmm.
I have a cannabis connection, but we probably lead totally different lives. But
Hmm.
yet, like we can talk about these things.
Yeah. And I just wonder, I guess not even just from Oregon, but like as someone who's working in politics, what do you see the solution being? Like, how do we deal with this polarized society that we find ourselves in? Like, what do you think? Like, what's the remedy?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the sounds snarky, but is actually probably fairly earnest and serious. Is getting off of social media.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah.
And I know that that's really not a solution, but it's also part of it is that we all are getting fed and accelerating in our own ideas about what other people are like
Hmm.
through all these different methods. And so actually meeting each other in spaces that aren't that, I think, is part of the solution.
Hmm.
Is meeting each other in places where we don't have a screen between us, which I know is easier said than done right now.
Right. Right. Yeah, for sure.
But like
Okay. So,
we have there are people who earn their living and also earn their power off of dividing us.
right. Yeah. And it
And
seems like,
like my side and the other side are not, they're not, nobody's innocent in that.
right. Yeah. No, I completely agree. Both sides are equally at fault. Um, what would you do like with the specific issue like the homeless crisis? I mean, in Salem and
Mhm.
Portland, it seems to me like that's a genie you can't put back in the bottle. If you were governor, how are you approaching that?
And I missed a little bit of that, but I'm pretty sure I understand your question.
Okay.
So in our community, what we did was we started by building relationships between providers, between the people who wanted to be part of the solution. And that was like super slow, like literally for a year and a half. All I did was build relationships between the local hospital and the public health, and between the hospital and the advocacy and mental health groups, and between the food bank and the advocacy groups, and between the businesses and the advocacy groups, because a lot of businesses are like, I want to be sympathetic. I want to like see the humanity in a person, and when they're pooping on my front door, it's hard,
Hmm.
right? Like
Right.
there's real issues there. And homeless camps attract people who want to hurt other people because they're vulnerable.
Hmm.
So there's like this whole cloud of things, but if we like look at it really focused, we realize that we need to build relationships in order to see the humanity in people and to get them housing. And so we like, that's what I did, is I built relationships. And then when the pandemic hit, everybody was frustrated because we're not seeing like a solution materialize. And then when the pandemic hit, all of a sudden we had FEMA money that we were able to house people in a motel. And so we took folks who were chronically homeless and who were fleeing things like domestic violence, and with children, right? Like people who are the most vulnerable. And we managed
Hmm.
to get them into housing by just putting them in a motel and daily case managing them and bringing them food. And lo and behold, they stabilized enough to move into permanent supportive housing. And so then it was like,
Hmm.
okay, we've got a Section 8 voucher for you. We're going to get you into an apartment. People who the system either had let down year after year, or they couldn't even find because the people didn't trust the system at all anymore. So we've
Yeah.
seen we've seen in our community like that, building of relationships and people investing in it, getting from motels to permanent housing. and like I think we're at 85% success rate now.
Hmm.
So I feel like that's, I mean, the city of Portland and Multnomah County are like wrestling with, do we get people safe and stable, or do we get them into housing? And it's like we really need to do both at the same time.
Yeah. So one of the things I've seen in Salem, at least, where I live,
Yeah.
is, the Union Gospel Mission just built this massive structure for, I think for homeless men. And they moved these two camps, one that was right off of I-5 and one that was on Hyacinth. But now those
Right.
camps are just popping up in other locations.
Hmm.
And, they've opened this massive structure that costs, millions of dollars. And yet the problem doesn't seem to be less than it was, And so I
Yeah.
know in Yamhill County, I would assume that there's probably less homeless people there. And so, not saying that the work you did wasn't important, but I'm saying that it seems like it's a much bigger issue that's going to require more resources in some of the bigger cities, and it just I don't know. It doesn't seem like there's a good solution that's being proposed right
Right. So, Kevin, I mean, I'm happy or sad to inform you that on a per capita basis, Yamhill County does have more people
now. Oh
who are
wow.
homeless. And it's what so all over Oregon, homelessness is one of the biggest issues, like literally all over Oregon. And in Lake
Hmm.
County, um but it's like it's different causes and perhaps different solutions based upon the communities. So in Lake County, when I talk to county commissioners there, they're like, mental illness is the thing that's most challenging for people in order to get them
Hmm.
out of homelessness situations. And for some
Right.
people, they're like, they're camping in the desert because the voices in their head have like keep them need to be as far away from other people. In our community, and so in Marion County and in Salem, it's a from what I told, because I talked to Jimmy Jones fairly regularly about this, and he runs Mid Willamette Valley Community Action Agency. For him, it's a lot
Hmm.
of severe and persistent mental illness that's like almost generational at this point, right?
Hmm.
Um, and it's folks who cost the system a lot of money because they come into the emergency room and like all of those things. We found but in Yamhill County, the largest demographic is women fleeing domestic violence with children,
Hmm.
which is its own unique set of
Yeah.
people, right? And
Hmm.
what we found is that for the folks who have severe and persistent mental illness, if we get them housing where there's somebody on site, so literally just like there's 16, this is an example, there's 16 apartments in this complex. One of them has a full-time like essentially apartment manager who is a peer who used to be homeless. And we found that we were spending about $100,000 less per month on emergency room visits as a county, as our local Medicaid provider, when they were housed as when they were unhoused. And it was simply because they had somebody to go to when they were, freaking out, when they were uncertain about their mental health or their physical health status. And the person in the apartment complex could be like, okay, well, I'm going to give you some Advil, give it 2 hours, we'll come back to this. Kind of that reassurance was saving the
Hmm.
system so much money. It was way more than the cost of actually providing them housing. And then with the motel sheltering project, we are finding that getting people stable and getting them to trust housing providers was the best way to get them into stable housing. So like it can work in our community. It's just a matter of building the relationships and then scaling it. And so it is going to cost, but like in Portland, they're putting massive amounts of money into it. But from what I understand, there's a lot less harmony between providers.
Hmm. Well, and I
And
know,
so I don't want to
businesses down
discount the
here.
scale of it.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure. Um, I guess, there are businesses down here too that are experiencing a lot of loss because of that too. I know the owner of
Yeah.
Rudy's Steakhouse posted a video on YouTube that went sort of viral, showing like how much merchandise they'd had stolen. So I do you know if there is like, is there someone in the state that's like in charge of helping lead the cause on this?
Yeah, so Oregon Housing and Community Services is the state agency. And I will say that Oregon Housing and Community Services and the actual providers on the ground, like Mid Willamette Valley Community Action Agency and the other ones that are all scattered throughout the state, have a challenging relationship right now. So
Hmm.
a good example of that right now is that OHCS, the Oregon State Office there, that's supposed to lead these things, um, set up a new software for these providers to help get them the money out to renters, because they're at risk of eviction right now, right? And so there's
Sure,
money that
sure.
goes to landlords and renters for paying back rent because of the pandemic. And right
Hmm.
now, the software that OHCS provided for the work that the providers have already been doing is so glitchy that they can't get the money out the door fast enough. And yet OHCS
Hmm.
refuses to change and let providers do their own work. So just those relationship building of being like, hey, what do you need? And then when somebody tells you, you actually listen to it and take into account is really necessary.
Hmm. Okay.
Sorry, that was
And
a lot
then
of words for your short
yeah, no,
question.
no, that's, I mean, and that's the beauty of podcasts, right? Like it's not, I think, I wish politicians would do more podcasts because it gives you a chance to really explain your ideas and your thoughts and your platform versus trying to speak in sound bites. So yeah, no,
Oh my
you
gosh,
don't need
sound
to,
bites
don't
are just
apologize.
like they're garbage.
Yeah, let me ask you, if you were, if you're governor, how do you handle what's going on in Portland right now? I mean, that seems like Portland seems like a black eye kind of on Oregon right now. I mean,
Yeah.
I was talking my mom and my aunt. I had lunch with them last Sunday. And they're in their 60s. And I was talking about, hey, is it safe to go downtown? And they were like,
Yeah.
well, if you go during the day, you watch where you park, and then my one aunt said, well, it sounds like we're talking about like, the worst parts of Detroit, and Portland has never felt like that to me. I'd
Hmm.
never questioned whether I'd be safe going in there. But I mean, a couple weeks ago when they had the Antifa and Proud Boys protests, there
Hmm.
was somebody shooting behind the mailbox. Like firing weapons.
That's
And
oh
no
yeah, yeah,
arrests
yeah.
were
I know what you're
made.
talking about.
I
Yeah.
mean,
Right, like in at
yes,
Mod Pizza.
yeah. So
Yeah.
I mean, what would that seems like a hot mess there. So what would you do? How do you address that?
Yeah. Yeah. So a good starting point is to listen to people. And I know that's like that's it seems trite, but it's really hard to do.
Hmm.
And it's a really good starting point. The other thing that I have seen, and this is like I'm on the record with this, is um, advocating for the Portland police. And like the governor's not in charge of the Portland police. That's the mayor,
Right,
on the mayor and
right.
the chief of police. But I'm terrible at staying in my lane, so I'll just say that when Portland police or the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office or the Oregon National Guard hold a line between protesters and counter protesters, or between Proud Boys and anarchists or anti fascists, when they physically keep them separated, it's kind of boring because nothing happens.
Hmm.
And I think that's a really good way to reduce the tension overall. And it's again, it's kind of boring, but like the lack of intervention. So the Portland police chief said, "We are not going to intervene. You all
Yeah,
need to
what
just like
was
keep your peace." And everybody knew that wasn't going to happen.
why what was the impetus behind that decision? You know?
Yeah, so I mean I know the rationale, which is that at this point people are so fired up by the presence of Portland police that
Hmm.
the PPB feels like their presence is like pouring gas on a fire.
I see.
From my perspective, if PPB can't keep the peace, then Multnomah County Sheriff or the Oregon National Guard or the OSP, Oregon State Patrol, under the leadership of the governor, should step in and keep that peace. Because the fact of the matter is that nobody benefits from chaos, and
Right.
everybody gets hurt by chaos. Like the people getting shot with paintballs and people being beat up in their cars. They're like fireworks
The
being shot at a gas
businesses.
station, right?
Yeah.
Like like businesses and people going about their daily lives get hurt, right?
Right.
Like if somebody's in a wheelchair going down the street and somebody thinks they're on one side or the other, or they just get caught in the crossfire, that's just like not okay. And it's not a society that I want to live in or I want to raise kids in.
Yeah. Well, and that, I think it's good. I like the fact that I've been able to bring up like hot button issues and you haven't strayed away from them. So, kind of with the police thing, what's been really interesting to me is, as I watch social media, like when the Black Lives Matter protests were really hot and heavy during the pandemic, I saw some of my friends like defund the police and that lived in Portland,
Mm-hmm.
like defund the police, blah blah blah. And now those same people are like, I'm so mad. There's like needles everywhere. So,
Mm-hmm.
there's all this violence. And it's like, well, yeah, we, because it seems like we are reacting to situations instead of being thoughtful about how best to solve problems. And out of those reactions, we're sometimes making decisions that aren't great, and actually
Totally.
aren't
Oh my gosh.
beneficial
Yeah.
to the greater good. And I feel like that's sort of what happened with the police is that, everyone wanted to be, and listen, I think there needs to be a ton of police reform. I think, there needs to be a lot of stuff.
I'm
I
with you.
do believe that there's too much violence that's unnecessary happening. I'm 100% on board with that. But I think you can feel that way and also feel like we can't defund the police. You know what I mean? Like that, because if we're taking money away, that's potential money we could be using to train. So but we don't think that way because if I say I support the police, you know, being a part of keeping the peace, then anyone that doesn't agree with me now, I'm all well, but like that reactionary mindset, I
Mm-hmm.
think, is part of the reason that we're so divided. And I don't know how to fix that because it's like we tell people they need to start meditating, or I don't know, but like people are just so reactionary to all things right now that it's hard to have any kind of like general discourse anymore.
Right, right. So, and I have the privilege of living in a rural area and, in my role as county commissioner, interacting with, for example, sheriff's deputies, right? But I
Mm-hmm.
also have the privilege and the opportunity to listen to folks who are pushing for racial justice and for police reform in the city of Portland. Like I get to listen and hear from both of them, and I see a lot of similar needs where people don't feel safe in their communities, and sometimes it's because of the police interactions with them. So Senator Lou
Mm-hmm.
Frederick, sorry, state senator from inner North Portland, Northeast Portland, right? So he lives close to the formerly known as Albina neighborhood or the Albina neighborhood. Um,
Okay.
he still gets profiled. He gets pulled over regularly by Portland police and Multnomah County sheriffs, and they know him. Like when they pull him over and they come and they see him, they're like, "Oh, hi, Senator Frederick," but he still feels at risk for every time he interacts with the police. Right? Like
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel unsafe. He feels
Mm-hmm.
unsafe, and so I want to respect that and recognize that that is a real perspective. And the data shows that he is less safe than me. Like me in a
100%.
rural area and me in an urban area, right? Like it's
Mm-hmm.
and he's black. Like Senator
Right.
Lee Frederick, right? So I want to recognize that, and I also want to recognize that different communities are also different, but we can still approach this from a is this making the public safer question? Like, is this decision, is this policy, is this change or keeping things the status quo? Is that making our community safer? And in some cases, so like let's take as an example traffic stops, right? Traffic stops are dangerous for police. Traffic
Mm-hmm.
stops are also dangerous for people who get pulled over.
Mm-hmm.
So we have the technology now to send somebody a check, or sorry, we have the technology to send somebody a check. We also have the
Yeah.
technology to send somebody a citation for a
Mm-hmm.
traffic infraction, and we don't actually need to put traffic officers or the public at risk, right? Because like you're just going to get that. And if you don't pay it, right, if you don't pay that ticket or contest it, then it goes on your record, right? Like
Right.
you have these things. So we have the ability to like triage traffic safety and traffic stops. Like that's one thing we can do right away. The other thing we can do right away to like reduce the tension in the interactions, especially for people who are severe and persistently mental ill, right? Like people who they still can benefit from treatment, but a lifetime of trauma means that they are out on the street, incapable of
Hmm.
like executive function. Like we don't need to have police be the ones to respond to that, to somebody who's
Hmm.
standing in the street screaming or taking their clothes off in the middle of a mall. Like we can actually have mental health workers or ambulances responding to that. And that's what the like cahoots model in Eugene is all about, and that's what the Portland street response is all about in Portland, right? Is it's you could say that it's defunding police, right? Because it's
Hmm.
taking some of their work and it's shifting it to other people. But in this case, it's all about having the appropriate response to the situation. So we can do that, but we can also hold police accountable. And that's what I would think of as police reform, is like really taking the Department of Safety Standards and Training, which is part of the Oregon state government, and holding people through it to a high standard.
Yeah, and I'm going to sound pro police what I said here, but I actually was profiled when I was in college, and I mean, I understand the like fear of like, wait a minute, I'm getting pulled over for no legitimate reason. What's and then being worried like, what is going to happen here?
Sure.
But part of the accountability seems to be body cams, which I totally support. I mean, I think they're making the work better. One thing that I think is tough though is that police do a very tough job and they see really tough things. I
Tough
mean, they
things. Yeah.
and if we're gonna require them to wear body cameras, we need to be not okay, but we need to get used to seeing things that we haven't seen before. Even if an officer fires their
Mhm.
weapon and kills someone that was reaching into their pocket, like it seems like when that video posts right away, it's, oh, this officer needs to be fired. It's like, well, look what happened. That suspect ran away and then reached for something. You know what I mean? Like that officer's
Mhm.
life was in danger at that point. He didn't know what he was reaching for. And so it's tough because I hear a lot of people talking about police accountability through body cams, but then when the footage comes out showing that the police officer is actually within their right with justified force, there's still like an outrage about it. It's like, well, we just have to get used to seeing things that are hard to see because we didn't have to see those
Hmm.
things before body cams existed.
Yeah, I see what you mean. And I also want to acknowledge that people who are on the front lines of public safety, whether they're police or fire or mental health counselors, they also need to have the best mental health services that we possibly can provide for them so that they can
Yeah,
do their job well without having trauma in their life, right? Like I hope
right.
that we can recognize that um, that seeing violence or seeing death on a regular basis is itself trauma, right?
Well, and not
and
only
and
that,
give
the thing
people
that
the tools to deal with that.
yeah, the thing that worries me about with the responses I'm seeing initially to the body cam stuff
Mm-hmm.
is like, so not only does this officer shoot and kill someone, which is a whole set of traumas, now they're crucified in the court of public opinion for when their actions end up being justified after investigation. And it's like, well, now they have
Mm-hmm.
trauma on top of trauma because not only do they, have the trauma of what happened. Now they have the fallout of being called a murderer and and just being raked over
Mm-hmm.
the coals, maybe doxxed or whatever. And and again, I it's hard because it's coming off like, oh, I'm pro police. Like I'm not at all. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
anti police either. But I do think that we need to have a rational conversation about these things. We need to be
Mm-hmm.
open to understanding multiple perspectives within the deeper issue.
Yeah, and I would say that while I can have perspectives on it, right? I also, as governor, the governor really needs to be leading these conversations, in my
Yes.
view, so that
Agreed.
because the governor has that ability to pull people in that otherwise aren't going to come to the table, right? Um,
Hmm.
so that so that we can make sure that everybody's values are heard, and also that their ideas are heard. Like there's uh, we have a particular perspective in the United States on policing that, like, no offense, came out of slave patrols, right? Like
Right.
that's part of our
Right.
history of it. But other
Yes.
countries have a different policing perspective. And so if we can bring in some of those different perspectives, I think we'll just be better as a society, right? Like, I don't want
Yeah.
to see police officers traumatized by their experience, and I don't want to see police officers harming other people so that they're traumatized.
Right. Exactly.
And I
No,
hope that none of
I,
us do.
right. Yeah. No, I completely agree. Okay, so we've kind of waded into like the deeper waters in a lot of those issues. What are some things that you would just like if someone's going, who is this guy?
Mhm.
What are some things you would want people to know about you or about what you would do as governor? What things haven't we talked about that we need to?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that right now we're in this place where we thought we were out of the pandemic, and we really are really, really not. And I just want to say that that's something that weighs on me all the time. From the very beginning, I took the responsibility as the local public health authority very seriously, working with people in the community to like keep case counts as low as possible. The next governor is going to be dealing with the pandemic, guaranteed, no doubt about it. Even if it's just
Mhm.
um, COVID as part of our lives, as opposed to COVID as the like crisis that it is. And the next governor is going to be dealing with climate change. And the next governor is going to be dealing with political violence and political intimidation, or intimidation as a political tool. And all of those things are things that in my job as county commissioner and in my role as a farmer in our community, like I work on every single day. And I feel like we really need that in our next governor. We don't need to have the institution bringing forward the next person in line. We really need to have
Mhm.
somebody who people from across the political spectrum are excited about having as their governor, that they can be like, damn, I'm glad that that person is there, even if I don't agree with them.
Hmm. Okay.
And that's
And
that's what I do every day is making sure people know that they're cared about and know that they have a voice in their community.
and I want to give you a chance to plug your socials and stuff here in a second, but you bring up an interesting point about COVID, um, and and the role of government in COVID. I got the vaccine. I had no problem with it. I think it
Mm-hmm.
was. I think people should get vaccinated. I do. It does make me uncomfortable to have entities requiring it, mandating it. That stuff makes me uncomfortable. It reminds me kind of September 11th when the Patriot Act was passed, and it was like, hey, there's this imminent threat. Give us your rights. We need to be able to surveil people. We need to be able. Well,
Mm-hmm.
once that threat lessened, the government didn't return those rights,
Mm-hmm.
and so I guess what makes me hesitant about what's going on now is that the government hasn't come out and said, hey, you need to get this vaccine, but what they've allowed is businesses, which I understand too. As a business owner, I get you're trying to protect
Yep.
your bottom line, and keeping people healthy and working is going to help that, but it
Mm-hmm.
also makes me nervous that entities are now making decisions about individuals medical decisions. Some of that makes me uncomfortable. Now,
Mm-hmm.
again, like I said, I think people should get vaccinated, but I feel like I can feel that way and also be uneasy about entities trying to like push people into making decisions.
Yeah.
What do
Yeah.
what's your take on that?
I think that the example of September 11th, well, I mean, it's coming up right on our 20th anniversary.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
I think that's an interesting way to think about it because, somebody asked me recently, they want my position on vaccine mandates. And I was
Hmm.
like, right now, Yamhill County is sending a refrigerated morgue trailer to Southern Oregon. And I
Mm,
hope to God that never happened. And that's an emergency.
right.
And so I view that as a failing of the system that we get to the point where that's necessary. And sometimes
Hmm.
that is necessary. And that's why I'm like, yeah, I don't I don't want to have mandates for vaccinations, right? Like that's
Hmm.
to me that represents a failing, and it represents that 10 steps ago we missed it and we went
For
down the
sure.
wrong path to get there. I mean, frankly, it felt really good for 4 weeks to not have a mask on and to not think about COVID. Like
Yeah.
it felt
Yeah.
good.
It really
It felt
did.
good. And I honestly think that the CDC dropped the ball when they said, hey, if you're vaccinated, feel free to live your best life. And if you're not vaccinated, feel free to keep doing what you've been doing. I don't think
Hmm.
that that was, one, the right message and really the best thing to do for our communities. And I think that the governor is saying, yep, everybody's good. Let's all party now. Um, I think was the inappropriate thing. And that's, as a person who, you know, I was so grateful to take my mask off and to not have restrictions in capacity in businesses. But there
Hmm.
have been many missteps along the way from not figuring out how to talk to people about the vaccine, right? Like, I was like, hey, governor, you're going to need to figure this one out in June of last year.
Right.
So there's many steps along the way, from communication to actually implementing things to like not listening to people along the way.
Hmm.
That is all, like, this is the non soundbite version, right? Of that, I think that they are a tool that we can use right now in order to keep things open, in order to keep businesses thriving or to get them back to a state of thriving, and to keep people in schools. Like for me, it's very clear how important at this point public education is, and an in-person public education. So
Hmm.
if we can increase our vaccination rates with people who are hesitant but are going to get it because it's now mandated for their work, like that's fine with me, because we have medical and religious exemptions still in the state of Oregon that are quite robust. For school, like I'm more familiar with it for schools because it's legislation that comes up all the time challenging the medical and religious exemptions. So we have
Hmm.
some pretty robust protections for people who really can't get it because they're immunocompromised or they have myocarditis, or because they're part of a religious group who absolutely it's wrong for them. That's
Hmm.
like a long answer to we shouldn't have gotten to this point anyway.
Yeah, which I agree with, and I guess the whole thing I guess just makes me nervous. Anytime the government, I find
Mhm.
myself being more of a libertarian. They just
Yeah,
don't do a very good job of organizing themselves. But I mean, I think there are certain rights like education, public health, that everyone should have access to. But I also think the government should kind of leave people alone if while they're doing their thing. So it does make me a little nervous just to have the government intervening, because it just seems like anytime you forfeit your rights to the government, you never get those rights back. And so that, I guess that's the only reason that I was hesitant. If I
I
knew it was
think
going to
you're.
be
I think
temporary,
it's
I'd
right.
be totally on board.
I think you are. I think it's really important to have that perspective. I mean, we
Yeah.
definitely saw it with the Patriot Act. We're like, oh, huh. Now you. Oh, okay. We just gave that up and we're never getting it back. I do
Yeah.
want to. I want to note that there was a lot of pushback from Republican legislators and Republican elected officials across the state on the ongoing emergency that the governor had in place, right?
Hmm.
And one of the things that I supported in this last legislative session was my friend Marty Wildy. He's a representative from Lane County, and he put forward a piece of legislation that would give guardrails to that state of emergency powers. And I thought
Mm.
that was a really good, as a candidate for governor, I thought that was a really good um, balanced position of requiring a justification to the legislature on an ongoing basis for these like exceptional circumstances that we're in.
Hmm.
Because really,
Okay.
in amidst the pandemic, legislators had very little role to play, And I think that should change in something that's a global in nature and an ongoing long-term emergency.
Yeah.
Like we
Okay.
all elect them, so
Right. Okay. I like that. So,
it's kind of
people
a
listen to
wonky
this.
answer, but
Yeah, no. So people listen to this and they're like, okay, I like this guy. He really, I think he'd do a good job. How do people support you? How do they get involved? Where do they find you? Uh, Give us some information on that.
yeah, the main our main campaign webpage is kulaforOregon.com, and
Can you
you
spell
can
that?
yeah, KULLAFOROREGON, which I was a spelling bee champion when I was in third grade. So,
Hey, there we go.
and then
Add that to
on
the resume.
that's right. On social media, it's just at Casey Kula. You can find me
Okay.
on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And really,
Okay.
on the website, you can donate, you can volunteer by filling out a form, you can just sign up for the newsletter so you hear what's happening, and you can see
Okay.
kind of all of my different positions on things of importance to the community.
What are your biggest needs campaign wise? Like, do you need people to knock on doors and make phone calls, or like what would you really, what would help boost? I mean, you're probably the only candidate that will come on the podcast, so I mean, I'm obviously cheering for you now.
Yeah.
So how do we help accelerate the campaign here?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, money is the thing that
Okay.
unfortunately that takes people from, every vote is a vote and votes matter, but if you don't get your name in front of people, then they don't know to vote for you, and it takes
Right.
money to do that. So it's staff time, it's advertising time, that like real nuts and bolts of the campaign. And then one of the best things about modern technology is that you can text people from home, so we
Hmm.
have a super simple texting platform that people can use to reach out to folks across the state. And it's like
Hmm.
you don't even have to go like this to do it, which is pretty awesome.
Okay. Cool.
And since
All right.
since
Well,
I'm young enough, I love texting, so it's the thing for me.
yeah. Perfect. And we can link all that stuff in the show notes. We can link your socials and your webpage. But yeah,
Oh,
is there
and then
anything
we're
that
we're
we?
gonna have
Yeah, go ahead.
in September and early October, and there's a list on the campaign website. But campaign events like listening sessions, where you can get stickers and buttons and hats and tote bags all around the state. So be looking for that when you go to the website. Sorry,
Okay,
Kevin.
perfect. No, no, no. I was just gonna ask, is there anything else that we missed? So we got that. Is there anything else though that we need to? You want people to be aware of?
No, it's let's get together
When
to get a healthier and safer state.
when is election day so that we know when we need to vote and whatnot?
Exactly. Well, that's the really good point, is that May 18th of 2022 is the primary election. And in the state
Okay.
of Oregon, your next governor will most likely be a Democrat. So that is going to be
Hmm.
the most important election. And I think it's April 12th is your deadline to register to vote as a Democrat. So if you're not
Okay.
registered as a Democrat, you have to change your party affiliation in order to vote in the Democratic primary.
Yeah, can we talk about that too? That has always annoyed me. Like, I don't like the fact that you have to pick a political party in order to vote in the primaries. Is
Right.
there
Yes.
is there a
So
reason for that?
some other states have open primaries.
Right.
It's
What?
really up to the party.
Yeah. I mean, is this something we can change? Because I just don't see. It seems to me to limit voter participation.
So
Like, what's the purpose of it?
you are hitting on something that's actually a pretty important thing, which is that in Oregon, because of our like automatic motor voter registration, where if you go to the DMV, you're automatically registered to vote, is that
Hmm.
most people going forward don't declare a party. They're actually non-affiliated. So
Right. And
the
then
proportion of non-affiliated gets bigger over time. And that means that those are all people who don't have a say in a primary right now.
right. Okay. So is
And
that
and
something you would work to
that's a
change?
party, yeah, that's a party politics decision to make. And that's one that I will definitely advocate for, because there's so many people, especially younger people, who are like, why would I declare a party except
Right.
that they don't get to vote in a primary?
Okay. All right. We've got that on record. You're going to try to change it when you're in office. Now, can I also get on record that when you win, you're going to come back on the podcast so I can say I'm the governor of Oregon on my podcast?
Oh yeah, but we have to talk about cannabis if I come back on.
Okay, I'm down. I'm down. And actually, I wouldn't mind touching on that for a second.
Mhm.
Do you think that helps or hurts or has no effect on your campaign?
I think it helps. I mean, people love
Hmm.
their plants in Oregon, right?
Yes,
Like, just whatever your view of the legal system or the recreational system or the medical system, um, people love their plants and they love cannabis. Frankly, I mean, it's an important part of our culture. I mean, I think that when it's federally legal, we are going to be the place that people talk about as having the best cannabis, just like craft
a
beer and
hundred
Pinot.
percent. Well, and we started the medical program was started first in Oregon, correct? We were the
Yep.
first state, so I mean, it's been legal here the longest. On a
Hmm.
kind of legal note, there, I was driving by a dispensary the other day and saw $75 ounces, and it made me think, like, do we still have people in prison for nonviolent drug offenses? Do we
As
still
far
have
as
people that?
as far as I know, no.
Okay, okay,
So there was a bill that was passed. Actually, it was chief sponsor was Senator Lou Frederick that I had mentioned earlier,
oh, okay,
and he's been working really hard to make sure that there's automatic expungement of
okay,
records when we decriminalize things or reduce the penalties
perfect.
for them, because I think that's a
Shout
really
out to
important
Senator
component of
Lou.
it. Shout out! He told me
Okay.
all about it, so that's why I know.
Okay. What specifically did you want to talk about cannabis wise?
Oh my gosh, there's so much. I mean, for me, as a former pot farmer, right? Since I sold my
Hmm.
license, um, having the system that was brand new, like brand new legal, right? Like a regulated system where we could sell it. I mean, the state was part of the project and part of the picture. Um, I
Hmm.
feel like that's one thing that we can bring to the world is like how to do this well and hopefully learn from some of our mistakes. Like I will say that I know that it was really hard for a lot of the original growers in the medical system when we opened up investment to people from outside of the state, right?
Yeah, that was I was gonna say we're doing it right. Like because I experienced that. So,
Yeah.
we were growing in a warehouse, had enough cards, we were legal the entire time, and then when it went rec, the law we passed said that in order to have any ownership stake in any cannabis business, you had to be a Oregon resident for at least 2 years.
Yep.
And then I think the government saw a cash grab by opening up the market to outside investors. And in the short term, they made a lot of money. In the long term, to me, what I saw was it took small businesses in Oregon, crushed them. It pushed out all the small growers. All of my
Yep.
friends were no longer growing. And the single chain dispensaries, my mom and my aunts owned a dispensary. It started to
Hmm.
push them out as Nectar and Chalice and all
Yep.
these other chains started to take over. And to me, I was like, well, if those small businesses continue to exist, we keep paying taxes in the state, where now these outside entities are making the money and it's going out of the state. And
Yep.
so that was really frustrating to me. And also, it seemed like, to be honest, the quality of the cannabis in the dispensaries was not nearly as good as these guys who've been growing for 20 years out on their farm. So,
Yeah. I
I,
think you hit it. Like, I think it's I will say it's the thing that I think about as being the biggest failure of the legislature specifically when they adopted
yes.
the rules around it. And if you talk to Senator Przansky, who was the head of the kind of like I forget what they called it, the Joint Committee on Marijuana Regulation or something like that, he
Hmm.
says that was the biggest mistake that they made. And that he wishes that they could undo is the allowing in the out of state folks on it, because it was in his view of it was that it was intended to be a project that brought people in out of the shadows and gave them
Hmm.
like a new chance in a legal system,
Right.
and instead it left them behind.
100%. Because these big money, these deep pocket businesses came in and just waited out. The price of cannabis crashed, and
Yeah.
they just waited everybody out, took the losses for a couple years, while those of us that couldn't afford to lose that money dried up. And I remember when I went to the city of Kaiser to start the rec process,
Hmm.
they told me, you were zoned properly before, but now that the rec laws have come into place, your zoning is no longer going to be valid. I mean, I had
Oh,
spent
that's so hard.
large sums of money to get that up and running. I broke down right there, because I was like,
Oh my
this is,
gosh. That is
terrible.
so awful.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, right now in Yamhill County, there some folks who are very anti-cannabis are trying to push a set of regulations that would greatly restrict both on-farm growing and on-farm processing. And
hmm,
so I'm trying to get out the word on that because we don't need to go backward. We found that
no.
businesses can work alongside each other, that there's really not conflict.
Right. Well, and that's the thing too, like being outside, like I had never tried cannabis until I was 32, and so
Hmm.
as I got into the industry, you have this dare mindset of, oh, all drugs are bad, and then you get into cannabis and you're like, oh my gosh, all the people
Wait a
here are just
minute.
like, yeah, they're just like super nice. They're all like sharing tips on how to grow better gardens.
Hmm.
They have amazing organic vegetables. It's like you start realizing like this is not anything. Once you get into it, it's nothing like what people that don't have any experience with cannabis would lead you to believe.
Yeah. And we in Oregon, right, like we talk a lot about and we moan the urban rural divide. And I'm like,
Hmm.
this like food, cannabis is one of those things that connects, Southern Oregon with Portland, right? Like
Hmm.
there are things that actually can bring us together. And I think that cannabis is one of them, but I also think it's a huge economic driver for rural areas. If we're
For
just thinking
sure.
about like where the jobs are at, like I have a friend who is getting ready to open a 30 employee grow and processing facility in the county. And like 30 good paying jobs is a big
Yes.
deal here.
Yeah. That's great. That's great. Well, yeah, I agree. You should definitely come back on. We'll talk a lot about cannabis. I
That sounds
I
great.
am a huge proponent, and I really appreciate your time. I know you're in the middle of this campaign. You've got other responsibilities as well, so I'm super grateful for you taking the time to chat.
Kevin, thank you so much for inviting me and thanks for the good questions.
For sure.